Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Faraji Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we got a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, we check in with Dr. Gerald Horne for today's Horne Report as he talks to us about those classified documents that were found in President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence's home. And what does that mean for the American people? We'll have that conversation. Also, we're going to be checking in with Senator Paul Strauss, who has been fighting for the statehood for the District of Columbia. We're going to get the latest about that situation. Later on, Meta has officially announced that it will reinstate Donald Trump's account on both Instagram and on Facebook. What does that mean? And then later we'll check in with my brother Sinead Wakorfor to talk about when you're not engaged at work, how do you stay productive? Stay with us. That conversation and a whole lot more in today's edition of The Culture here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Faraji Muhammad. Let's jump right in, as today we're going to get another installment of the great report talking about both local, both domestic and foreign affairs. Now let's check in with Dr. Gerald Horne for the Horne Report. Dr. Horne, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. How you feeling, sir?
It's all good.
Good. Dr. Horne, let's just jump right into it. First and foremost, sir, this situation around these classified documents. First, when President Trump, when we saw this whole dilemma with the former president having his classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago residence, I mean, there was a big brouhaha, of course. National Archives, the FBI, so many different agencies wanted to know what was going on. It took him a year and a half to maybe 2 years after he left office to finally have his people to give up the documents. And they're still making sure that they got all the necessary documents. So there was a lot of talk, oh, he is incompetent and all of those things. But then, boom, we see that we hear that President Biden got classified documents from his time as a former vice president when he served under President Obama. So we found that out. And of course, his team giving up those documents very, very quickly, did not sit on them like President Trump did. And then a couple of days later, boom, former Vice President Mike Pence they found some documents from his time in the White House and in office. So what do we make of this, sir? Is this classified document thing, is this a regular thing? Is this a common thing? Not regular, but is it common that these high-profile political officials would walk away from their administrations, walk away from the White House with classified documents?
It is common, but what is also common, I'm afraid to say, is that there's a double standard in terms of the scrutiny and prosecution. That is to say, below the level of the chief executive, the president, you are routinely prosecuted for being sloppy with documents. We do not expect Mr. Biden to be prosecuted, not least because there is an informal rule in the Justice Department that you can indict a sitting president. But we don't expect Mr. Pence to be prosecuted either. Mr. Trump, of course, is another question. And this leads to the other point, which is that the problem with these documents is that the United States overclassifies documents. Recall that just a few days ago, Mr. Biden's team ruled that documents from the assassination of President Kennedy in November 1963, that thousands of documents from that period, decades ago, would remain classified. I'm not sure what the purpose is. I'm not sure what the reason is. Many of the alleged perpetrators and wrongdoers in 1963 have now passed on to the great beyond, but it's a reflection of the fact that you have many bureaucrats who put a stamp of top secret or the like on documents when it does not need to be there.
So this puts us in a different space then. If they're overclassifying the documents, what does that say about the actual content of those documents? What does that say about the information? And I'm wondering, Dr. Horn, if President Biden is holding some documents from 8, 10, 12 years ago, is that information still relevant at this point? Because I know that geopolitics changes every day. Things change, relationships change. The conversation that the United States may have with China 10 years ago is a different conversation today. So does that weigh into this conversation, like the actual content?
It certainly does, but unfortunately, it's hard to make an opinion about these documents unless we know what's in the documents, and of course that's secret.
Right.
So it's sort of a catch-22. But this brings me to another point, which is that Mr. Biden is being criticized sharply by fellow Democrats, including Dick Durbin, who's the number 2 Democrat in the U.S. Senate, hailing from the state of Illinois. He's also been criticized by Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who obviously has been on the wrong side of many debates with Mr. Biden. And this raises another point that has occurred to many, which is that is this document scandal, so-called, is this a way to try to ease Mr. Biden out of the White House? What I mean is that there's a lot of discontent with Mr. Biden, not least because of this Ukraine escalation, which some suggest is bringing the country and the world to the brink of World War III.
Mm-hmm.
Second point is that if he's elected in November 2024, he will be 86 years old. And we already see that Mr. Biden is losing a step or two and losing the velocity on his fastball. And so this document, so-called scandal, might be a way to chip away at his already eroding credibility and to prepare the path for another Democratic nominee. You may have heard that the Democratic governor of Illinois, the multimillionaire J.B. Pritzker, one of the richest men in the United States, has been overheard speaking about his presidential ambitions. It's been suspected that Governor Newsom of California harbors similar ambitions, not to mention Governor Whitmer of Michigan. So once again, it's hard to figure out what's going on because so much is classified and so much is secret.
Right. And I want to throw in there also too, Dr. Horn, and Amanda hasn't even served a full 30 days in office yet, but there's already talk that Governor Wes Moore of Maryland could be a potential contender for 2024. And I'm like, what? Are you serious already? He hasn't even got started. But they's like, oh, he's the future of the Democratic Party. And I think another gentleman, I was reading another political article they were talking about. I think his name is Mr. Frank Shapiro, who is another possible contender. And so they were making the point that the Democratic side, their bench is getting a little bit deeper as we're talking about 2024. So I found that to be very, very interesting. But back to the point that you're making, that this may be a way to ease out the president. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, just like I'm sure you thought to yourself, what is there to gain for Democrats to crap on their president right now, considering there has been some big wins that the Biden and Harris administration have been able to get in terms of, moving the needle on certain issues. But why stop the momentum? Why be, for Senator Dick Durbin? And I saw his quote. Like, what are you trying to do? Because there's so much partisan bickering that's happening right now that it opens the door for more stuff to be said about the president. Are we all happy about President Biden's performance at this point? No, we're not all happy. But at the same time, if we look across the aisle and see the alternative, we're saying, so I'm not understanding the strategy here for Durbin, from Manchin, and some other Democrats who are looking to try to discredit this president. What would you say is the strategy from that?
Well, I think with regard to Manchin, it's clear. Mr. Trump won his state by double digits in both 2020 and 2024. he is up for re-election in 2024. As a matter of fact, he might not even run for re-election in 2024 because it's unclear if he could prevail as U.S. Senator. With regard to Mr. Durbin, he hails from the state of Illinois. And let me remind you what I said a moment or two ago about his governor, Governor Pritzker, having presidential ambitions all of its own. And once again, I need to reiterate and underscore this foreign policy crisis in Ukraine, which is not going away anytime soon. And the only way for the United States to extricate itself possibly from this quagmire is to change the man at the top. And that provides a very useful way to get him out of the Oval Office.
Wow, that is very, very interesting. Let me go to my culture crew. Folks are checking in as we're having this conversation with you, Dr. Horn, talking about this classified document scandal. Conscious Thought, my guy, you kicking us off today, bro. You said relative to the continuing revelation of classified documents being found all around, we may want to consider that this is not coincidental. I'm interested in going down that road just a little bit, Dr. Horn. We see it on both sides now, both Democrats and Republicans. Do you feel like this is coincidental? Do you feel like that there could have been some intention to kind of put these candidates, and we know that Mike Pence might be thinking about running for president as well for the GOP. But do you think like any of this is coincidental?
Well, I think one would have to be a coincidence theorist in order to feel that this is coincidental. The stakes are so high in Washington, D.C., involving not only power, but also funds, also money. And so when you see documents uncovered in the Biden garage in Delaware, at his office in Philadelphia, at the Penn Biden Center, and by the way, speaking of something that may not be coincidental, it's quite striking that Mr. Biden was being paid a handsome sum from the University of Pennsylvania, a leading Ivy League university. And guess what happens? The president of the University of Pennsylvania, who lures him to Philadelphia, is now U.S. ambassador to Germany, one of the most powerful and prestigious ambassadorial posts that the United States can hand out. But once again, it's hard to say until we get an idea of what's in the documents. For example, we know, or we suspect that we know, that Mr. Trump was holding back documents concerning North Korea, that he was holding back documents concerning French President Macron. It's unclear what Mr. Pence had in his home in Indiana, and it's also unclear what Mr. Biden had.
It is very unclear, very, very unclear. Look, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Horn. I also want to pick Dr. Horn's brain about social media companies, as now social media companies are under scrutiny, especially with a new lawsuit that is calling for social media companies to be held accountable for their roles in politics and in other areas of our lives. So we're going to have that conversation with Dr. Horn and, of course, with you. So stay tuned. A lot more to come at you here on The Culture, here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is roland@rolandsmartin.com.
Folks, welcome back to the culture here on the Black Star Network. We've been checking in with our very own Dr. Gerald Horne from the University of Houston to talk to us about the latest issue around the classified documents that we're seeing, this document gate, some have called it, with President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence, and it seems like former President Donald Trump. We're going to certainly keep our eyes on this story as we have this conversation. But we wanted to shift gears, and I wanted to pick Dr. Horne's brain around the issue of social media companies as they are once again back in the spotlight as a result of not just the January 6th situation, but I did want to pick his brain, and we're going to go into a bigger conversation later on about this, folks. But I just want to throw this out there to get Dr. Horne's take on it, because social media, Meta in particular, the formerly known as Facebook, has announced that they will reinstate former President Donald Trump's accounts on both their Facebook platform and on their Instagram platform. And we'll certainly talk more about it. But this is just another example of what we're seeing with social media. And there is a new lawsuit that has been filed against social media companies in regards to their role in this whole situation. I want to bring Dr. Horne back into the frame here. Dr. Horne, first and foremost, before we get into this lawsuit piece, what's your take on Meta's announcement that they are going to reinstate President Trump's accounts?
I don't find it surprising at all. Keep in mind that part of the Republican Party agenda going into 2024 is to attack what they consider to be woke corporations. Recall that Governor DeSantis of Florida, who is number 2 right now behind Mr. Trump, scored a lot of points with the Trump base when he began to attack the Disney Corporation, which is a major factor in the economy of Florida. Here in Texas, where I'm speaking to you now, the state attorney general has been attacking Wall Street firms because supposedly they're reluctant to finance corporations that manufacture weapons. And so when Meta, that is to say Facebook and Instagram, yield to Mr. Trump, I think that what they're trying to do is forestall one of these kinds of attacks on them, particularly since Meta has been losing buckets of money in recent years as it tries to move into the virtual space. And so it does not have much room for error at that particular level. And so it decides that the better part of wisdom is to let Mr. Trump back into their good graces, despite the fact that undoubtedly he may use their platform to create mischief.
That's a big risk. That's a big chance to take, Dr. Horne. That's a very, very big chance to take on that. And that's so interesting that that's the case. Now, I want to also talk about the fact that, folks, there's a class action lawsuit that was just recently filed, which could hold, as Politico said, could blaze the trail to hold social media companies accountable for an increase in eating disorders, anxiety, and depression. The suit is expected to be filed in California's Northern District Court next month, and could decide whether the companies need to pay up and change their ways if it's allowed to proceed. This is as a result of what we have been talking about in terms of social media's influence on young people, particularly young boys and younger girls, teenage boys and teenage girls, around the issue of body image, body positivity,